Welcome to Be Wise, information about cannabis for older adults. Brought to you by Active Aging Canada, a national charity that supports older adults living well and remaining active. Production for this podcast was made possible through a financial contribution from Health Canada's Substance Use and Addictions Program. Now, let's go to the Active Aging Canada studios and join National Executive Director Patty Clark and Ward Maxwell, Director of Marketing and Communications. Today, we're talking about the risk of overconsumption and the risk for lifelong cannabis users.
I think it's important, before we get chatting about this topic, that we clarify the difference between overdose and overconsumption. People sometimes talk about an overdose of cannabis, and that's really not accurate. A better term would be overconsumption. You can't hurt yourself with cannabis. That is an overdose. But you can make yourself very uncomfortable and unhappy, and that is overconsumption.
That's right, Patty. People often talk about cannabis being a soft drug that causes little or no harm. But over the years, dried cannabis THC has increased enormously. People who have not used cannabis, and specifically cannabis with THC, in many years may be surprised by how much stronger it is. Older adults who begin to use cannabis in later life may be at risk because they don't have experience with this type of product.
THC is not the only cannabis product that people can overconsume. When CBD is taken orally, some people have reported side effects that include a dry mouth, low blood pressure, lightheadedness, drowsiness, and even diarrhea. And a rare side effect is liver damage. CBD can also interact with some prescription medications.
And what that means is these factors can lead to overconsumption.
Right, Ward, let's talk about the effects of overconsumption. People who have consumed too much cannabis will often report feeling sleepy, anxious, fearful, or nervous. They may also report having visions. People will often feel nauseous and they may vomit. But if you experience any of these symptoms, as we said before, please stay calm. Often these effects will pass in a few hours.
I'd like to pick up on that, Patty. We're not trying to scare you. These are not anecdotal ideas or made up to frighten you. These are medically observed effects of cannabis overconsumption. Let's stress that. Overconsumption. What we're trying to say to you is, if you're going to try out cannabis, whether for recreational or therapeutic reasons, you have to be in charge and learn what you're doing, what you're taking, and finding the right dosage for you.
Yes, determining a safe dosage of products such as salve, oils, and edibles may be challenging for people. For example, the effect of edible cannabis products are difficult to predict for new users. So for the same reason, caution is always recommended with homemade edibles. There's a risk with homemade edibles that cannabis is not evenly distributed. So be very cautious of this if you're making it on your own.
We're going to end this podcast with 2 warnings. No one's really sure about the effect of cannabis on lifelong users, but because it affects the brain, there's a chance that lifelong users are a high-risk group for cognitive impairment. However, there's no scientific proof one way or the other, but it's something to think about. Now we're going to talk very shortly about symptoms that might require medical care. If you experience that you cannot stop vomiting, if you have severe chest pain, or you experience severe dizziness, please seek medical attention immediately. What we're going to do, though, is encourage you, start with a low dose and take it slow. Don't try to rush things. Remember, you're always in charge, and you are the one to determine what is right for you. Well, that's it for this week. We're going to come back next week to talk about cannabis and alcohol, and cannabis use and the risks it poses to older adults. Until then, thanks, Patty.
Thanks, Ward. Talk to you next week.
Well, that's all the time we have for today. For more information, go to activeagingcanada.ca. where you can order a copy of our Be Wise booklet. It's available in 17 languages and is free. The views expressed in this podcast do not necessarily represent the views of Health Canada's Substance Use and Addictions Program. Join us for our next podcast, and until then, remember to be active, be healthy, and be wise.